Well, thank you for hanging in there, everybody. This is the last presentation or the last session of the day. It's been a terrific day so far, but I have to say I'm so inspired by Julia. How about a round of applause for Julia? What you're doing is truly amazing, and I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to mention something in a minute, Julia, that ties in very closely to what you're doing, and perhaps there's a way that we at NYU can partner with you in some way. Let me start by saying that today I wanted to talk a little bit about leadership and about how it applies to not just football in Brazil, but really all different areas. One of the things that I wanted to start out by doing, though, is talk to you about the NYU Tisch Institute for Global Sport, which is the organization that I head up. And it's an organization that Marcella is a part of. Professor Hall, who presented earlier today on AI, along with Smith, are both affiliated directly with our institute. And we really aspire to be the global leader in sports business education. And I don't say that I say that with humility, even though it may not sound like it. But you have to give us the discount for the U.S. American factor, right? When we talk, right? You got to you know how that goes, right? Americans tend to state things in a much more direct way. But I can say that we do have the #1 master's program in the world, the MS in Global Sport. And this program, over its history, has graduated as many women as men. And this year, in the new cohort that comes in to New York next week, we will actually have more females than men. So we're delighted to be able to, advance the cause as well. We're very passionate about women's sports. And as you know, women's sports are really starting to take off in the US these days. And we know that, and of course in Europe as well, and we know that that's going to continue to flourish here as well, particularly the things that Julia and Nosa Arena are doing. We have 10 full-time faculty in the Tisch Institute for Global Sport, and all of them, each one of our full-time faculty, have sports business experience. They've worked in the industry. And of course, folks like Professor Hall, who is one of our adjunct faculty, all have deep connections and deep experiences in the sports industry as well. We also offer certificate programs for executives. And what I'm going to do today is give you just a little peek into one of our certificate programs, which is our leadership development program. And I'll just give you a very, very, very narrow slice of that, but I just wanted to give you a flavor for that. And I also think the reason we're down here today is I think we are an excellent fit with Brazil football. And as I was saying to Fabio Palma a little earlier, Brazil has always been at the top of the world in the game on the pitch. There's no question that the style of play and the quality of play and the quality of talent that comes out of Brazil is extraordinary. What we're now starting to see is the commercialization of Brazilian football start to emerge. And given our role as sports business educators, we very much wanted to be a part of that. And so that's why we're here today, to do this, to host this conference and partner with UFMG. And by the way, I'll urge all of you to make sure you're back tomorrow for the modeling and session of the modeling day of the conference. But we're delighted to be here. I had in mind I was going to be able to see the slides, but that's not really the case from where I am. So we'll figure it all out. We also at the Tisch Institute for Global Sport have birthed recently a new initiative, which is the Lab for Transformative Leadership. And that's what our leadership development program is housed in. It's a very important initiative. And what we're trying to do in this initiative is really help build the next generation of leaders. And by doing, in the way we do that is we reimagine the future. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the change forces that are shaping our world. I mean, you know these well, you live them every day, but I want to put them on one or two slides so that you can really sort of see them all at one time and understand how leadership competencies, the things we need to do to be leaders, are actually evolving in the same realm of those change forces that are shaping our world. Our programs introduce new skills, they provide practical tools, and they really help leaders. The whole purpose is to help leaders reach their full potential. So just a couple of themes that come out of our leadership program. We talk about the future of work and generative AI and how we as leaders can balance technology versus humanity. It's an important question and an important issue that we're going to come to grips with in the next decade or so. Another piece that's important is storytelling. Being able to influence others through effective, compelling stories, much like we heard Julia talk about today, is so powerful. It's such an incredibly powerful leadership tool. Social capital is another thing we talk about in our program, and that's all about building networks and relationships, and how do you actually proactively work on broadening your network in a very targeted way that you believe you add value to the network and the network adds value to you. And then finally, and this is something I'm going to talk about in a little more detail, is this notion of leaders and followers. And basically, we believe in the premise that leaders and followers are roles, not ranks. And that's going to come through, I think, in some of the things I'm going to talk about in just a few minutes. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the principles of followership. So let's talk, I want to start though, before I get into the details of that, I want to talk a little bit about these change forces that are shaping our world and really shaping the future of leadership. When you think about it, it's very difficult to determine whether something you hear, read, depending upon, almost independent of the source, whether it's true or not, right? That's the world of social media that we live in. There's a very low accountability. Everyone has a megaphone, a voice, and we just don't know what people's motives are and whether they're loyal to fact and truth. So that creates a certain amount of distrust and doubt. So don't you think that that distrust and doubt that surrounds us, that in the world we live in today, affects the way we respond to leaders, and the way it affects the way some of the tools and behaviors that leaders need to employ? Yeah, it does, definitely. Also, the hybrid workplace has really made it more challenging with people working from home, some people working in the office. It has made it much more challenging for us to get aligned and function as a team. The other thing that's important to know is the workplace is becoming much more diverse. In the US, more than 100% of the new jobs created for the balance of this decade will go to people of color. If you couple that with the growth of Gen Z in the workforce, Generation Z was 6% of the workforce in 2020. It will be 30% of the workforce in the US in 2030. These numbers are not exactly the same, I'm sure, in Brazil, but they are similar. And as a result, the ability for 5 generations, boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, and even the silent generation, the older ones, to be able to work in the same workplace effectively requires the ability to really have a respect for differences. And then finally, just the speed of change, whether it's social change, cultural change, technological change, geopolitical change, is really having a profound effect. So what does all that mean? So what it means is when you take those same 5 things that I just talked about on the left-hand side, and then you look at the leadership climate that it leads to, it means that there is distrust and doubt. There is greater complexity, greater uncertainty. Reaction time, speed becomes an asset. It's a positive thing if you can act quickly. There are significant obstacles to teamwork and collaboration. And there's a lot less time for reflection because we are constantly being inundated with information, and our smartphones really promote that. So when you follow this very simple little framework, you get to the conclusion that the things in the right-hand column there are the things that are going to be critically important for leaders in the next 10 and 20 years. Authenticity, acting like one's true self. Employees, players are looking for coaches and leaders who represent their authentic selves as opposed to someone who's trying to sell you something, so to speak. Accountability, doing what we say we were going to do and delivering results. The ability to be agile and adapt. That is clearly true because of the greater complexity and uncertainty and the speed of change, is that we have to be agile. Ability to analyze and synthesize information. There has never been more information than is available today, quantitative and qualitative. And if we're not able to analyze that and synthesize that into questions and ultimately answers, we're going to be left behind as leaders. The world is ripe for innovation. We're seeing it all over the place. We're seeing all sorts of new things emerge, new business models, new approaches. So innovation is another important competency. Respect for differences. I mentioned how different the perspectives are in the workplace, whether it's because of a diverse workforce or because of the age differential, which is just another dimension of diversity, that we have to be able to embrace a respect for differences. It means listening. It means being willing to have an open dialogue without digging in and formulating your perspectives and opinions. Being an effective communicator. I talked about storytelling and the ability to communicate and how important that is. Being an influencer and someone who's collaborative, who's willing to give and take and work with others. Very few powerful things get done by one individual. It's always a team. And then self-awareness and developing talent are two other critical variables that are going to distinguish great leaders from average leaders. And one of the things that I want to talk about is the one that's highlighted there in yellow, which is influence and collaboration. So let's go to the next slide, Ugo. And I want to talk a little bit about followership. So what is it? Why does it matter? What are some of the principles? And what are some of the obstacles? The way I like to think about followership is it's kind of a merger between leaders and followers. It's kind of a collaborative form of leadership where you get input from those who are part of your team or are, quote, followers. Next slide. It's important that leaders and followers are striving together to achieve a common goal. And often the best pairing of leaders and followers come when there's a very clear vision, North Star objective that you're both trying to accomplish. Followers also have to balance this notion of respect for authority of their leader, but also not blindly follow orders. What you're going to see, and I'll talk about it in just a moment, is the best followers are those who can, in a tactful way, push back, question, even I'll use the word challenge leaders to get to a better place, as opposed to just assuming the leader has all the knowledge and knows everything. And also, one of the things followers do is they play a key role in distributing the leadership of the leader throughout an organization when you're trying to get something done, and particularly in a complex organization. Next slide. So some of the key points. When we talk about leaders and followers, there's a clear bias to talking about leaders. We hear very little really about followership and followers. So just know going in that there's a bias towards leaders. I mentioned their roles, not ranks. I mentioned that it works best, the leader-follower pairing, when there's a higher purpose or some other overarching goal. Next slide. So some of the benefits, in fact, you can go to the next slide after that one. Some of the benefits on the left-hand side, I don't want to read through all of them individually, right? But, you know, the notion of followership promotes cohesion and trust. It empowers followers to gauge and help lead organizational change. You know, promotes continuous learning. And then you look at the right-hand side, and so what that means is, it means inclusivity. It means, you know, beyond the command and control top-down leadership, we have to be able to essentially be inclusive with our leadership and encourage others to participate in it. It enables you to move quicker and be agile. You know, and hybrid work can be unifying, even despite some of its limitations and pitfalls. So we go to the next slide. So I want to talk about a handful of principles of followership. The first is that followers are as important as leaders. They amplify and translate the leader's initiatives. That's one of the things they do. They also lend their credibility to the leader by showing their support for the leader's direction. Think about that. Followers give credibility to the leaders by showing their support. They can also provide advice and insight to the follower to help refine the ideas or initiatives. And without followers, leaders are on an island of their own. And in a large, complex organization, which is any organization today, even if it's not large, a complex organization, it's very difficult to get things done when you're doing it by yourself as a leader. Followership is more of a role than a rank, meaning that every day we shift back and forth, each one of us, between leaders and followers. There's many times where I'm functioning as a leader. There are other times where I'm functioning as a follower. And I welcome both roles, but it's important to be agile enough to shift back and forth between the two. And you're beginning to see the picture I'm painting that there's a very subtle distinction between leaders and followers. And that's a good thing. If you can create that, that means you're a fully engaged team, typically. Next slide. Now, it's interesting that followers and leaders, or I should say followers, fill their role for different reasons and motivations. In some case, they expect some sort of reward from the leader, and that's their motivation. In other cases, they're simply looking to serve the leader because they feel that's their duty. And in other cases, they believe so deeply in what the leader has architected with them, perhaps, that they're trying to accomplish, that they're just all in because they believe in it. Next one. Followers can also be described based on their approach, meaning active or passive on one dimension, and the other dimension is independent thinkers, or do they just simply follow along without questioning? And let's look at the visuals of that on the next slide. So what you're looking at here is across the horizontal axis, you've got passive on the left, active on the right. Across the vertical axis, you've got an independent critical thinker at the top and a dependent uncritical thinker on the bottom. Critical thinking meaning that you're willing to think through the problem or the solution that your leader has offered and willing to contribute to it, challenge it, question it. Of course, how that's done is an important factor. And then in the middle there's something called the pragmatic or the survivor who sort of, juggles all four of those, right? But really, the best practice is to be in that top right quadrant where you're essentially leading as a follower. The bottom right is a conformist follower. So yes, you're active, but you're just really taking direction and doing everything you can to help bring the initiative to life. The bottom left is the passive follower. You're not offering critical thinking, but you're also not typically terribly engaged in the project either. And then the top left is called the alienated follower, the cynic or the skeptic, where they have their own thoughts, but they're very passive in offering them up and engaging with their leader. So again, the top right is really the sort of sweet spot. The next one. Effective followers often possess the traits of leaders. And, not surprising, right? I mean, you think about everything we've talked about, it makes sense. So go to the next slide, you will. Here's some of the traits: being collaborative, being adaptable and flexible, being driven by purpose, having a high self-awareness. We haven't talked much about that, but knowing yourself is so integral and so critical to being an effective leader. That means knowing your strengths, knowing your limitations, knowing your tendencies, knowing when you shut down input, because that's sometimes you just know what you want and you want to run, and so just knowing that allows you to, anytime you have higher self-awareness, it allows you to moderate your behavior to overcome the unconscious and the instinctive behaviors. That's why self-awareness is so critically important. And then finally, being an effective communicator. We can skip the next two slides. What I wanted to shift to next, I'm one off here. Hold on. Well, that's a reprisal of really all the points I mentioned a few moments ago. So that's just the summary slide. So go to the next one. These are the obstacles to followership. Number one, there's a natural resistance to change. So if you're not in the mode of being an engaged follower, there's a resistance to change. Passivity, lack of initiative, historical over-reliance on leaders. Some organizations, I've been in organizations where followers aren't of the mindset, and they may not even be capable of being engaged followers and best-in-class followers, because the organization's never done that before. It's always been top-down. Sometimes conflict avoidance is a reason that's an obstacle to followership. Because remember, an independent thinking, active follower engages with the leader, discusses, debates, questions the initiative. Some people fear owning a voice because they don't really want accountability. I'm thinking of something, but I don't necessarily want to serve it up, because what if I'm wrong? I don't want to own that. It's a lot safer if I just follow the leader's direction. There's a delicate balance between collaboration and autonomy. Sometimes the leader might feel like you're just being too aggressive and pushing too hard, and we just need to move forward and execute. And then sometimes there's concerns about the motivation of the leader. So you don't engage as a follower because you don't really have a high level of trust, or you think the leader's narcissistic or not so ethical or so forth. And then my final slide and then we can open it up to questions, is what kind of organizational environment, culture do you need to support followership? One is where you encourage followers to share their voice and engage, where leaders create an environment that fosters this active participation versus just lining up and being a good soldier. There's this ability to, an organization that has an ability to balance this leader's authority, but the followers' independence and autonomy to offer perspectives on that. And then it's important that we recognize and reward followership. Not a lot of organizations do that. You see them reward leaders, they really reward followers. When was the last time you heard of that? A culture of open communication, and essentially the last piece is a commitment to developing future leaders, because there is no better training to be a future leader than to be an engaged follower with a leader or group of leaders that are mentors, that care, that are nurturing you and helping you develop. So that's a little bit about one of the many topics that our leadership development program entails. And I wanted to bring that one up today because I think it's so relevant to what's happening today in football in Brazil, and really any growth initiative. I think making sure that the leaders aren't trying to do it all by themselves, and that they have a group of people that they're bringing on board where they can engage with and really be partners in the whole initiative. Thanks. Oh, thank you. I would love to hear a question or two.
Yeah, I'll ask the first question first. Thank you for your presentation, Dean Gennaro. My question is, so based on your experience, both in the industry, now in academia, what do you see as invariant characteristics of leaders and followers across these different types of institutions, and differences as well? So how are they similar and different based on the setting and the type of organization?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that question, Hugo. There's a wide range of embracing of this concept. Some very much so, but many other organizations not so much. I don't know if I could draw lines to say, you know, in financial services, it's this way, in professional sports, it's this way. But I would say that, you know, a more mature organization, one that is not so nascent, young, embryonic, is more likely, I think, to evolve to a point where you embrace followership. I do think it's now, not to say that a 5 or 6 person shop and, you know, can't embrace this either. In some cases it's easier because you're dealing with a much smaller group of people. But I do think as organizations mature, it's so critical, given the complexity of the world, given all those things I talked about up front, how they really get to the point where they can embrace this and fully leverage the talent of everybody involved. Thank you.
Dean Gennaro, thank you for this amazing event, first of all. My question is, in the sports industry, given that it's so emotional, there's a lot of leadership that is driven by ego, as you were describing. Do you think this will change with newer generations sophisticating their knowledge to work in the sports industry? Or do you think that is something that new leaders need to learn how to navigate to accomplish success in a sophisticated way?
Well, it's a very good question, Andres. I would say that we're going to see, we're seeing change. And I do think that the business climate today, including in sports, is demanding the kind of full engagement of an organization, and you can't have it if the leader's directing everything from the top down. You also, and I think we all know this, you're not going to retain employees if you create a culture where it's completely leader driven to the extreme. So I think it's really important, and sports is an interesting case study, right? Because of the emotion involved in sport, in football, in really all sports. So I think it provides a little bit of a special case all to itself. And my hope is that a lot of young people today who come into the workforce will be challenging by nature, be asking the difficult questions, and hopefully doing it in a way that's not off-putting and so forth. But that will, I think, tell leaders that they need to engage. One of the things we do in our leadership development program is we talk a lot about the behaviors of Generation Z. And there has never been a distinct difference as there is between even millennials and Gen Zs. We often think of those almost similarly, but they're very different. And so if we understand how to engage Gen Z and draw them in, I think we will accelerate the process of this in sports and other industries.
Hi, Gennaro. Thank you for your speech. So, based on your expertise, what do you think that can help companies to create this culture if it's usually done based on a systematic implementation within the company or with the leader itself, or it's more not so systematic and it can work better? Could you tell a bit about how to do some steps into creating this culture?
Yeah, I think, you know what? I think it starts with humility. Humility by leaders. To acknowledge, to look in the mirror and acknowledge they do not have all the answers. And the reason you want to bring great people in your organization is because, not just to execute, but because you want help. And if you can get to that point in your heart, honestly, where you're looking for talented people who can tell you when you're wrong, or even tell you that they think you're 10 degrees off to this direction or that direction, that's really where it starts. Now, I think the forcing function is going to be the competitiveness, the complexity of the world we live in. I don't think there's as many leaders today that say, I got this. Here's what we're going to do. They may think that, and I think there were a lot more that said that years ago, but now I think they're saying there's a lot going on here. We got to figure this out together. Now, I'm not saying at the end of the day, you don't say, we got this, let's go. This is not about like permanent debate, but it's about engaging others to get to the answers.
Gennaro, thank you. This was very interesting. I can totally relate to what you said. I can totally see my team and the people I work with in this. And I think that one topic that could be maybe added, and I really want to listen you talk about it, it's the importance of the leaders to show vulnerability, because sometimes I see like people from my team, they just feel like when they fail or when they do something they think they're not good enough, they look at me and they think, well, Julia would never do that wrong. She would never make that mistake, and that's not true, right? Because, I mean, we're all humans. So sometimes maybe that's the way when leaders show that they're vulnerable and they show it's okay if you make a mistake, it's okay if you're not, you didn't wake up good and you don't want to go to work, and that's fine. That happens to everyone. That helps the followers to understand that they can also become leaders. I don't know if you agree, if you want to.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you for bringing up that excellent point. Vulnerability, the willingness to show vulnerability. You, by showing that you don't have the answer, or by asking a question as a leader, you draw followers in, right? And it's so critically important. Yeah, I mean, you have to admit when you're wrong, or even admit when you're really not sure about something. And again, it's not something that will be ongoing forever, that you're not sure about X or Y, but at different points in time, there'll be different things you're not sure about. And so to be able to show that, and also to be able to, sort of embedded in this point too, is the ability to not always punish or penalize anyone for failing or for making a mistake. You know, we are all fallible. You want to have a good average, okay, in terms of the percentage of times that you don't make mistakes, but that's all part of it. And sometimes the mistakes come from taking risks that are calculated risks and good risks. So that's another element of that too. But yes, very important. Okay, so I think we're at the end of our time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I would just ask our panelists to remain seated. Everybody else, have a wonderful rest of your week. And again, thank you very much for coming.